All right, good afternoon. I'm Liz Stahl. I'm Extension Educator in Crops with the University of Minnesota Extension, and I'd like to welcome you today to our webinar series, Essential Row Crop Management, a socially distant webinar series for spring of 2020. Again, thanks for joining us today. This is a collaborative effort between our colleagues at Iowa State University, especially, we'd like to thank Megan Anderson and Angie Reich-Hintz at ISU, and also Phyllis Bongard, Lisa Behnken, and myself have been pulling this together this short webinar series. So anyway, if you've been to any of these earlier sessions this week, you kind of know how this all works. If this is your first session, glad to have you join us. So first of all, we'll have our presentation, and if you have any questions, please do enter them in the Q&A box. You can enter those at any time, and we'll answer them later at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please enter those in the chat box. So again, use the chat box for technical issues, and then questions, please do use that Q&A box. And I'd also like to remind you that we will have a recording of this session available on the U of M website later. There's also a SciBox account, which I have that link in the chat box right now that you can access, and there's also all the other webinars are in there right now and other resources as well. So Lisa will be our speaker today, Lisa Behnken. She's an Extension Crops educator with University of Minnesota Extension as well, and she will have about a 15-20 minute presentation, then we'll have time for questions afterwards. Oh, and one other thing too, if you want CEUs, we do have information on how to self-report those. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa.
Well, hi everybody. It's great to have you back here again today. And what a morning that we woke up. It's been raining, snowing, white covered today. So, when I look at the plants out here in this first slide, we're not there yet. What I'm going to focus on today are 5 goals. You may have more than that, but I'm just thinking of our pre-emergence herbicide programs and what we might expect as we go into this growing season. I did want to point out, first of all, where I'm located. So I'm sitting here down in southeast Minnesota at Rochester, and we've been conducting herbicide trials in corn and soybeans for the past about 20 years or so in that area. And the weeds that we have on that site are giant ragweed. We have a good population of that, common lambsquarters and waterhemp. And really for the majority of the farmers in our area, those are the 3 big weeds that are causing a lot of headaches. So that is what I'm going to focus on today. So the 5 goals really to think about is knowing and understanding your weeds. So what do you have out in your fields? Which weeds are your big problems? What kind of herbicide resistance are you dealing with? So, some herbicides may or may not work as well for you anymore. The second one, again, is then choosing the right herbicides, knowing their strengths and weaknesses, because again, if you've got some herbicide resistance concerns, make sure that you've got one that you've chosen that will be effective on those weeds. If possible, maximize the rates for your soil types and field problems. I know folks are looking at ways to trim budgets this year, but my best advice on that then is to prioritize the fields. You know which fields have the bigger problems. That's where you may need to focus more dollars, maximize those rates to get a good head start. You may have fields that you've done a really good job or have fewer problems. So that might be the place where you would, again, put those as a lower priority and be able to reduce maybe your inputs on those herbicides. Monitor them, because we can see differences each year with the weather on how those pre-emergence programs work. So you want to pay attention to the performance, which weeds are coming through, how soon they are coming through, so you can have timely post applications put on. And then in the end, evaluate the success, both of your pre-emergence programs, which one worked, what weeds came through, and then look at the entire program for the whole year. But really pay attention to that, because we do have some misses, and if possible, maybe map your fields, take some notes so you know how to plan for next year. One of the things I wanted to share is that in our private pesticide applicator training programs in Minnesota for quite a few years, we take advantage of this to ask farmers about their practices, things they are doing on their farm. And what we've noticed in the past 5 years, if not longer, we see a good increase, a big increase in that you know, 60 to 70% of the farmers in southern Minnesota are using a pre-plant or pre-emergence herbicide program on all of their corn acres already. And if you look at the other two columns, some of my acres, most of my acres, really we're in that 90% range where folks see that advantage of using that pre-emergence program. In soybeans, we also see that increase, and so we are in that same area, you know, 75% on all their acres, almost 90+% on most of their acres. So we are using the pre-emergence program and taking advantage of it. So you say, well, if everybody's using that, why focus? We've got this, we know what we're doing. Well, one of my concerns is, as I've been doing meetings this winter, and I think others have heard this, is there's a lot of rumblings about, well, maybe this is the year that, I don't need my pre, or I'm going with the Enlist, Extend, some of my other programs that I'm looking at technologies, and I can get by without it, and I'll just worry and put it all on as a post. And my message today is don't. Don't stop making that investment in the pre-emergence programs, because they are too valuable to your entire weed control program on your farm. So keep it in your plans. Make sure that you get those pre-emergence programs on for any of the technologies. So why? Let's think about it. Don't stop. Take that time to get those pre's on. And remember, it lays that great foundation to get ahead of the weeds and give your crop the best advantage for getting going. So your corn and soybeans out of the ground ahead of the weeds. It lays usually a residual herbicide that's going to work for you. Again, giving you that weed control that you need to give that crop the advantage. And what that ultimately does is buys you some time that can be very critical in June when you're trying to get a lot of things done, or with corn can be in May, but it widens the window before you need to get that post program on. And we see that way too often. I mean, it's just pretty much can give you an extra week that can be very necessary when we get into a rainy pattern, or sometimes even 2+ weeks if you put down the right pre-emergence herbicide. So it buys you that time. The other thing that we may forget about is how it evens the playing field and actually gives your post-emergence program kind of an advantage, or it helps it do a better job. You lower the density of some of your problem weeds. You may not get all of them. You may not get 90%, 100, but what if you take out 60% or 70% of a problem weed? Your post-emergence program doesn't have as much, or your post program doesn't have as much to take out. You may have fewer species. So your pre-program takes out several species that you're not dealing with. And it also kind of resets the clock so you have a uniform size, which again helps that post-emergence program do a really good job on controlling your weeds. So evening the playing field. And then finally, our ultimate goal, helping you to achieve those cleaner fields, reducing the weed seed bank that you may have to deal with later in the year, and of course the coming years. So as we look at all these technologies, I know this really focuses on soybeans at this point, but think about any of these technologies, whether you're going with the Enlist beans, the Liberty beans, conventional, your Extend beans. To be successful, all of them need that pre-emergence program. They all recommend that is your starting block. Get that foundation. So do not stop. Continue to have that in your plans. So let's go back to those goals. Knowing and understanding your weeds. What are they resistant to? What do you know about the biology? This is kind of a simple table or graph that will show you the things to think about. So as we move into, here we're sitting, as I said, we just had snow on the ground. But generally, as we move into planting, southern Iowa, as we move south here, you're earlier than we are here in Minnesota. But we're looking at our corn planting goal around April 15th. And you see, some of those weeds basically start to emerge the same time we want to put our corn in. So tillage, helps work the field, take out some winter annuals, but it doesn't take out many flushes unless we get delayed in our planting. Then we can take out a few flush or a flush of those weeds. But in general, with corn, we need that pre-emergence herbicide that's going to manage those tough weeds that we have that are emerging with the corn. We want that herbicide to take out that competition. With soybeans, if we're on an early planting schedule, kind of that same story as we would with corn, is tillage doesn't take many of the weeds out, so we need a very effective pre-emergence program to work for us to take out those early emerging weeds. But if we would think about tillage as another tool for us, adjust that planting date a bit for our soybeans, and I've got it here in the middle of May, we can take out a good flush of these early emerging weeds and then lay our pre-emergence down, so it helps us a bit later in the season and with the next flush of new weeds. This picture shows you some trials that we did both in Rochester and Waseca, and kind of gives you the visual that if I have an early May planting, I have high yield potential, but I really do get all of the weeds. So here's giant ragweed where tillage really doesn't take anything out. Now we need our pre and our post herbicide to clean up all of the giant ragweed. If I'm willing to wait, and if I can wait maybe just a couple weeks, my tillage practices can now take out almost half of that population of giant ragweed, that early weed that can cause a lot of problems. So it takes out half of the tillage, and now your herbicides, again, it reduces the workload that they need to do. My goals 2 and 3 kind of go together. You need to choose the right herbicide, know what the strengths and the weaknesses are. Think about, again, what resistance problems I may have out there. And then maximize the rate for your soils, as I said, and kind of rank your fields as to where the priorities are. This photo will show you a couple of examples. We've got Broad-X here, which is a great herbicide, but it does have a weakness. You see the giant ragweed coming through here. We gave it about a 26% control. So Broad-X, good control of the small seeded broadleaves, lambsquarters, waterhemp are grasses, but we're gonna miss the giant ragweed, okay? Clean otherwise. Compare that to Surveil, which is very good on giant ragweed, 90+% control, great control on our other weeds. So paying attention to where those strengths and weaknesses are. Giant ragweed isn't your problem. This would be fine, but if that's a concern, Broad-X wouldn't be my first choice. I'd want to go with something like Surveil. Here I've got 2 authority programs. We've got Authority First versus Authority Supreme. Well, Authority First has first rate in it, which gives us this 80-some% control. The authority is not strong on it, but the first rate is. Compare it to Authority Supreme, where you have authority plus Zidua, and we're getting about 35% control. So you see the giant ragweed sneaking through. I like to show this one because, again, you see the products, their differences. But if I have giant ragweed that's resistant to the ALS materials, my first rate's not going to work very well for me. And then I will be back down to 35% control, just like on the Authority Supreme. Great on the other weeds here, but knowing that population and what you're dealing with will help you make a better choice for a pre-program. So if we kind of lump a whole group of herbicides together in corn, what are my good foundations? And I'm starting with giant ragweed because that is usually our most difficult one as we get going here in the spring. So you've got Acuron, Flexi, Resicor, Harness Max. You can see the group. In Iowa, you can use Corvus. You've got Balance Flex. I mean, so there's some great programs there for corn. And Verdict, some of these we can see some difference if we go with a low rate versus a high rate. The high rate will give us better control as far as that pre-emergence program. So a lot of choices there that can be made to get us going with corn. And these all provide excellent control of our other weeds like the Waterhemp, lambsquarters, again, getting us started for the season. Here gives you a kind of a visual of that. Here's Acuron down, 3 quart per acre. And it's really just a pre-program. There's no post that follows. As it gets going in the spring, we sometimes see some giant ragweed sneaking through. I have 80-some% control here, but sometimes we'll see more giant ragweed come through and you'll go, oh, I wonder if it's working for me. Well, some of our herbicides in corn have great, what we call reach back. They keep working and they will take that population down. And as you move through the season here we are in June, coming out here, we can see that we're picking up to 99% control. So the Acuron, give it time, it's working for you and you have excellent control. So a great start, a great program for corn, one of those examples. Here's Harness Max, just another example to show you. We have a few giant ragweed in here, 94% control. So picking a good program that gives you that great start for the crop. When we go to soybeans, we think of Prefix, Warren Ultra, Surveil, Zidua Pro, Fierce MTZ, Authority First, Sonic. Going with the higher rate will give us some great start or great control of giant ragweed early in that season. So those would be my top players. You can see that here with Prefix and Warrant Ultra. Again, 95+% control, great control of our other weeds. So this is what we want to see when we have a giant ragweed problem in our corn and soybeans. We want to take those early flushes out, keep the fields clean so our crops have the greatest advantage. Residual Pro and Fierce, they move down to the next tier. They're more in the 85+% control. And again, that's not bad. We've got great control of our other weeds. The density has been reduced. We have fewer to take care of with our post program. We've evened the playing field. You can see that the size is very uniform. So this is the advantage that we give that post program. Then we have fewer to take care of and clean up. Here's where you also need to be out there just watching to see how many are coming through and how big they are. So monitor your fields. It moves us right into that goal 4. Monitor the fields to see how that pre-emergence program worked for you so you can time that post and be effective for the season long. Most of our herbicides, we want small weeds. We put this matchbook up here to give you an idea of what small weeds mean. Very small. If they start to get bigger than that, it's more difficult for the post program to get that job done. So the pre has brought you the time, it evens the field, but you still need to pay attention to get these very small weeds early enough so you have complete control of the season. In this case, you say, wow, that looks pretty messy. Well, here's from our site in Rochester where we have a very dense population of giant ragweed. So we gave this about 50% control. 2019 was a tough year, a lot of rain, very cool. Our herbicide programs, they were activated very quickly, but I think some of them ran out of gas very quickly too. So usually triple flex, we'll be seeing more upper 80s, low 90% control of giant ragweed, not so in 2019. So again, paying attention, monitoring these fields, what this tells me is I need to jump as soon as I can to get my post program on before that giant ragweed gets out of control. And 2019 gave us some challenges because we maybe had 1 day a week to get that job done. So some of the ragweed did sneak through and got too big for the post to give us a great job. So again, each year can be different. Usually this would buy me more time. 2019, we had to get that post on sooner than later. All right, here we are with the Broadex again and the Surveil, just bringing that final point again about monitoring. Broadex, if you went this route and you saw the giant rag coming through, a reminder, monitor, pay attention to the size, get that post program on as soon as you can. Surveil here has bought you more time. You've widened the window and you can wait. The final part again is evaluating your success. Were you happy with the program? Did you have some escapes? Did you map those fields so you know where you need to put more attention perhaps next year? So pay attention to the products, how they performed for you. Here's where, back to that triple flex, 50% control in 2019. As I said, most years we can get closer to 90%. We knew that we were having a miss here. We came back with our post program, the Harness Max and the Roundup, 99% control. So effective, you understand what was going on here, but we pulled the program off and this is a success for the season. Here's Harness Max at 94%. Again, doing cleanup basically with the Diflex and the Roundup. Great program for the entire season. Enlist Duo following our Sure Start. Here's Sure Start, just like Triple Flex, 90% control. This was 2018. So now you can see that difference between the 2 years. We have some giant ragweed, but the Enlist Duo coming back over, cleaning that up and having a great program for the season. And here in our soybeans, just another example, that Residual Pro going down. We've got about 90% control of the giant ragweed, coming back with our Enlist Duo, 99% control of our weeds. Great program for the season. But you don't know that unless you get out there and walk them early and pay attention to what's going on and make those notes. Sometimes we see this. We can have skips. We have seen fields in August where Waterhemp has come through, other weeds have come through. We have some herbicides that sometimes with the Prefix and our Warrant Ultra, we'll see velvet leaf come through. That has been a challenge. So we know, again, with our post program, we need to catch that velvet leaf. You may have lambsquarters coming through or some giant ragweed. Again, pay attention to those fields and see what your misses are so you can make a good evaluation of your total program. All right, I kind of went through the pre's and I'm going to end a little bit on reminder with Waterhemp. this is moving into the post program, but we start with our pre. And we have to remember that water hemp's it's a different beast out there. And for some dealing with Palmer amaranth in their fields, you know, these are long, entire season emergers. We have to pay attention to what's happening with them. Our best approach is that we layer those group 15 herbicides, which give us residual for the entire season to control that water hemp. And here's the visual to go with that. When we think about giant ragweed, lambsquarters, we talk about this early emerging over here. But our water hemp and our Palmer amaranth takes that entire season, peaks though in mid-July, and then tapers well into end of July, and we'll see it coming through in August. What happens with our good pre-programs is they are working for us on this early end, but there's a point where we don't have enough concentration in the soil to catch this peak. So we talk about layering and getting that additional residual here to carry us later in the season to control this water hemp. Our target's about 25 to 30 days after planting. And then again, our goal is to have that working for us for the season. It may not be complete, but this is still our best program for taking care of and working a good program for water hemp throughout that season. Here's from 2015, some trials we did several years in Rochester. This shows you an example of a group 15 called Outlook. Again, put on just with pre, not layering, comparing it to a layering where we get much better control for that entire season. And this is what we'd like to see. So the value of layering those group 15s. And again, from those trials that we did, kind of putting it together, whether you had Outlook, Zidua, Dual, Warrant, basically we had 25+% better when we layered those group 15s versus just a single application as a pre-emergence. So gaining a great increase in our control by using the layering concept. So let's just wrap here again. So we want to make sure we're following and thinking of those 5 goals. Know and understand our weeds. Think about the biology, when they emerge, when you need to basically attack them with your herbicide program. Think about water hemp, that long, emerging for the entire season. Choosing the right herbicides, knowing the strengths and weaknesses. If I have herbicide resistant problems, like I mentioned with the giant ragweed, where it's ALS resistant, that Authority First or Sonic's not going to do a great job for you. So make sure you understand that. Choose the right herbicide for your biggest problems. Maximize your rates for your soils. They will be different than what we see in Rochester. So maximize your rates, prioritize your fields, lay those out so you know where to put more investment versus where you can maybe, again, hold back because the weeds aren't as bad. Monitor the performance of your pre's so you can get your posts on in a timely manner. And then look at the entire program for the season so you can evaluate that success. Then I guess that is my presentation, but I do want to mention a couple of websites for you that we will put up in the chat box as well. This is our crops website where you can go in for information, but we do have a site. Here's where our research reports are filed. So when I went through some of these examples, if you'd like to see those trials and the results of many of the herbicide programs, how did they perform, that will be located at this site right here with our regional research trials. And so you can look for, we go back for a number of years. You can take a peek at those and see what maybe your program might be in that trial, whether it's corn or soybeans, and see how they performed both from an early season with the pre-emergence as well as the entire program for the season. If you don't see something and you have questions, I also welcome that you can send me a note or of course ask some questions today. So with that, Liz, we'll take questions.
All right, thank you, Lisa. And again, just a reminder, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we will be our best here to address those. I do have some questions. One question would be about layering. So you talked about layering for water hemp control. How do you do that? Is it like 50% at pre, 50% at post, or some other strategy?
Okay, that's a real good question about the layering. It really does depend on which products you're choosing. So first of all, whichever group 15, and pay attention to what the number one is, how much can you apply at each application, because it varies with the product. And then what's your season long amount that you can apply? So you would have to follow the label with those instructions. The second would be watching that soybean growth, where it is at and what stage, because each of these herbicides has a cutoff point where if the soybeans are at V5 stage, that's the point where, again, we're done with outlook. Or where at Zidua, if you use that as your layering, there would be a point that you say, I can put it on as pre, but I can only get to my V5 soybeans, and then I'm done with Zidua. With dual 2 magnum, again, as a starting point versus when do I switch to dual magnum. Warrant probably has the longest window where it can go later in the season, but it's by product. Check that individual rate each time, season long rate, and then where the soybean growth stage is that you can apply that layering. Our goal with that is when you plant, think about that target time at 25 to 30 days after planting, because that's where most of these herbicides start to, the concentration decreases enough that we want to pump that back up to keep on working so you don't have escapes in here.
Okay. And here's one that kind of goes with that as well. How does one resolve the conflict between early planting of soybeans for maximum yield and running out of post-residual before July water hemp flush?
Okay. And that is a good question as well. And I know it's a challenge because we want that early planting. What we did with the trials that I shared here, we actually did plant very early May. That was our goal. We wanted to try and push that to run out. And what we found is still targeting that 25 to 30 days made the most sense. If we waited too long, we would have some escapes that we might deal with later. So that is still the goal. But remember, when you plant early, our goal too is to have that canopy close for us. And if we can get our soybeans up and growing in good conditions after we've layered in our herbicide, our optimum goal would be that canopy closes for us as well. So as the second layer, the residual may be wearing down, our canopy is closed, and then we're using the soybeans to help us with our weed control at that point. The other option that some are looking at is, in-row cultivation. At some point in here that you might use some in-row cultivation to take out a flush, helping us with that layer as well. But really, we're relying on crop canopy to help us for the rest of the season. That is our best goal.
Okay, and what would tie with this as well, Anne asks, in beans, what chemicals and calendar date to watch for with the late layer application to allow timely cover crop planting?
I know that's a question that we have, because trying to balance that is not as easy. Again, straightforward answer. And Liz, I'd almost go back to you on that one for the question, because the later we get in the season, of course, then we have that residual that would carry and could impact some of our cover crops. And I may have to refer to the fact that we would put some other resources up on our website as to, which cover crops could survive or which would do best for us as we push that season later for water hemp control. So there is not an easy answer or best case as to what you can do, because we're trying to control a weed, and then we're trying to grow something that will act like a weed at a point. The herbicide's not going to know the difference. We're going to have some issues there. So I think we should put some resources up to help with that.
Yeah, we can certainly put some resources in that SciBox account, and we do have some resources related to that on our Extension Crops website if you look on our cover crop site, but we can put that on there. Now this one kind of relates more to post-emergence, but I did get a question. What is better for water hemp, 2,4-D or Banville?
Okay, so the question, 2,4-D or Banville, from the work that we have done, they can both be, they both have performed well, but here are the limitations that we found actually last year that made a difference. Was they both, again, get your pre-emergence program on to start. Your Banville and your 2,4-D, we want small weeds. So either one, we're wanting small weeds, and we're getting the water hemp or other weeds that are up. So we're controlling what's there. It does a nice job. The limitation comes is that neither one of these are providing us residual control, and we have this peak to deal with. So when in Minnesota, we have a June 20th cutoff date and for the dicamba programs. Enlist can go a bit later. So if you've got good weed control here, and I've got to get my dicamba on, you're only going to take out what's up and growing. Any of those misses at this point, we still have to consider what might come through here. That's why we talk about layering with that group 15. With my Enlist, you can wait a bit longer because we can go into early July with our application. So you may take out a few more Waterhemp at this point, but if they get too big, that's, you may miss some of those. But again, you can wait just a little longer, take out a flush here, but we still need that layer to carry us through here because we don't have any residual with them. So Minnesota has the timing with when my dicamba gets on. That will challenge us, but the key point here is there's no residual with those products. They will control what's up as long as they're not too big, but we need the group 15 to carry us through the season.
Okay, and I'm looking at our time. I know we still have some questions yet, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We have at the 1:30 mark. So again, we will have a recording of this available and some resources in the SciBox account. And want to put in a plug for tomorrow. Join us at the same time and we'll have tillage options this spring with Jody DeYoung Hughes. But for anybody who wants to stay on, I do have another question for you, Lisa, if you want to take that too. But otherwise,
Sure.
thank you everyone for attending. But all right, if anybody wants to stay on, I do have a question. This one might be a little tougher for you here because I know this not exactly in a row crop, but this is what is the best herbicide for the wild parsnip carrot family and crop friendly? So that gets probably a little bit out of our normal row crop.
Right.
I think
well, again, I could go back to what we use in some of our road ditches and things where we're still looking at a dicamba 2,4-D. Generally, it's a mixture of some of our broadleaf herbicides that we might be using, and depending on which crop. And I really think the person who's asking this might want to write us a little more detail as to where they're dealing with the problem, what their crop rotation, which crop might be helpful. But typically, that's what we're working with are some of those broadleaf, like the dicamba, the growth regulators, and some of the mixtures, but that's the best I can do right now. And they can certainly email me on the side too.
And I think you'd have to be looking at the herbicide labels for those rotational restrictions too. That would be really key. There are some nice resources that have that, but that summarize that, but the big thing would be checking the label to make sure that that rotational restriction would be met.
Right.
Okay, but yep, and that is all the ones I had in the box. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. And all right, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.